Good morning, afternoon, or evening, ladies and gentlemen. Allincrypto here, and welcome back, guys, for another daily cryptocurrency market update. If you guys are new around here, every single day at 1 p.m. UK time, we drop an update just like this one to help you guys stay up to date with the latest and greatest things happening within the crypto space and also the broader markets. And we're going to be doing exactly that in this video. We're going to spend the first half of the video looking at a little bit of news to come out over the past 24 hours. Firstly, in regards to Coinbase and their stock, which we've been highlighting as something that we've been very interested in since the sort of $30 range. We think Coinbase is going to be one of those mega stocks of the future. And then we had some pretty huge news coming out of the UK in regards to regulations and regulators actually advocating for funds to tokenize. This is a huge advancement. You know, we've always stated since we stumbled upon this technology that it was going to fundamentally change the world. And that's exactly what it's doing. And we're seeing that really excel. And then we're going to be talking about what's going on in Argentina with the new president shutting down the central banks and saying this is non-negotiable. This was his plan all along. When you have a shit show like the things that have been happening in Argentina, it gives rise to radicalism. We've seen this throughout history. This is a very common trait throughout history. Now, that radicalism doesn't have to be a bad radicalism. It can go that way. It's quite a dangerous crossroads, I think, to be at. And I'm very fascinated to see what way Argentina goes and some of the advancements that happen over the next, months or years with the new president in charge. If he lasts that long, we'll see. But it's very kind of like a Bitcoin, utopia-ish view that Argentina are kind of moving on at the moment. Then related to that, we're going to be looking at Bitcoin and a transaction that took place where the transaction fee was $3.1 million. This is not really acceptable for a global money. I am a bit skeptic of Bitcoin's practical application as a money. I think Bitcoin holds a lot of traits as a store of value. I think it's a great store of value. But as a practical money, I think Bitcoin as a layer one probably doesn't work. I also question, if Bitcoin was adopted by everybody today, what would happen in a downturn? Central banks who caused the big booms and busts, and maybe we wouldn't have these big booms and busts in the first place without them, which is why I'm very interested in what's happening in Argentina right now. But one reason the Great Depression was so great was because we were on a gold standard and the central banks really couldn't do much. Whereas if we look at 2008, for example, they brought us out of that by printing a load of money, but that has repercussions later on down the road, And then we are going to talk about the entire sort of debt system. We're going to be looking at, first of all, a tweet from Arthur Hayes, who's talking about liquidity. This is the great game, ladies and gentlemen. This is federal debt. So this is total public debt in the United States, which is at 3.2 trillion. It's actually higher than this, I believe, now. And look at the markets. There's a huge correlation here. And this is the proliferation system. When you have a debt-based system, it's inherently inflationary. And we are at an inflection point. And we're going to be looking at liquidity from a number of different avenues and how it matches up with the markets. Then we'll finish on Bitcoin. And when we're going over this, I'm actually going to insert a clip of Ray Dalio talking about how the US is at an inflection point right now. Now, it's going to be very interesting to see how things... There's two ways it goes in the US. And this is why, again, we question Bitcoin's origins. It's almost too good to be true that this new money system, and we love Bitcoin, we really believe in it. But it's almost too good to be true that this entirely new money system came in at such a vital conjunction and has been such a massive success. With the US system, and other countries will capitulate, and this is the dollar milkshake theory way beforehand, it will meet its end, right? But that doesn't mean the people that control it don't become the controllers of whatever the new system is, just to get that out there, which is likely going to be a blockchain-based system. Crypto has a role in all of this. But it either goes one of two ways, and this is the reset. Hyperinflation or a debt jubilee, essentially. And either one is, I believe, going to be a traumatic experience, certainly for those people that haven't invested in anything outside of that system. So I don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole. We got a lot to cover. Let's dive into it. Let's start off with the Coinbase news. Coinbase stock price rises to the highest value since May 2022. Now, we have been speculating on Coinbase for a long time. We think Coinbase, if blockchain is going to be as big as it is, Coinbase is going to be a mammoth of a stock. And I know many of my Patreons are well and truly on that train and have been for a while. We have huge news out of the UK. UK regulators advocates for asset managers to tokenize funds. The United Kingdom's financial regulator has endorsed a blueprint model designed to facilitate the tokenization of funds for asset firms. One thing that really interested me with Hedera was the fact that Aberdeen, which I think was Simple Life beforehand, largest asset manager in the UK, they actually are tokenizing their money markets with Hedera. Very, very interesting. You've got DLA Piper that are facilitating Toko. They're doing a lot in that space. And this is ultimately the way that everything is going to go. Currency itself is going to be run on blockchain, identity, everything. And this is a huge advancement in that kind of arena. On to Argentina's president. I still am failing to pronounce his name. Milei, I think, say shutting down central banks is non-negotiable. Argentina's president-elect Javier Milei said on Friday that the closure of the country's central bank, a signature campaign pledge, was a non-negotiable matter, according to the statement from his office posted on social media platform X. This is going to be very interesting, and this is a kind of Bitcoin dystopia that we're seeing rise. He's previously been a massive fan of Bitcoin for the same reasons we are, largely because it represents something. It represents a movement away from central banks and corruption. However, whether he's going to choose Bitcoin as a currency, like El Salvador, I don't think El Salvador, even though it was great, I don't think it was massively successful as a currency in El Salvador. These are just my own takes. I have genuine, as somebody who's very interested in economics and certainly interested in a lot of the libertarian economics, your people like, your Austrian economics, really, people like Ludwig von Mises, Friedrich Hayek, Milton Friedman. I don't know how practical Bitcoin is as a currency that can be used day to day by everybody. And even with the implementation of things like Lightning, I have a money kind of should be able to move with demand in terms of supply. I don't really, it's a very interesting dynamic that I don't want to spend the whole video talking about, but this is super, super interesting. Talking about that, Bitcoin Sender struck with a $3.1 million transaction fee, largest in history. This is what I mean. And you can't, there's no one to ring and say, hang on, something's gone on here. Moving on and talking more broadly about central banks. This is from Arthur Hayes, somebody that we would love to get on the show eventually. Getting my feet did and observing how bad girl Yellen is busy pumping financial assets. Don't get distracted. Dollar liquidity is increasing and Bitcoin will go up as well. This is a chart of the net RRP and the TGA balance changes. So this is when we're looking at an asset like Bitcoin, we're looking at it against the US dollar. And people will say it was supply shocks. And we've covered all this in extensive detail when we were really looking at this and analyzing it, and also analyzing why we're doing this based on liquidity. It was no surprise that we'll use M2 because I think the stats on M1 aren't quite great. It was no surprise that Bitcoin did what it did here with the injection of new money. And if you understand a fiat-based system, people think of it as just, money. It's not. It's money. Currency in the United States dollars, for example, is the asset. There's a liability behind that that's debt, right? And this is actually how money itself comes into existence. It's an accounting system that basically, when loans are made, there's a debt that's issued on the back end of it and there's a currency that's released, right? So if they're increasing debt, like what Janet Yellen's doing with the Treasury right now, if we look at federal total public debt, you can see that markets are exceptionally, not just the SPY, we'll chuck gold on there. You can see the correlation here. And of course, they have their own little cycles and their own moves, but generally, if what you're pricing things in is inflating, and this is inflation, then, which is a tax on everybody, by the way, which we agree with the Argentinian president on, then, if the currency is inflating, the thing that backs currency is inflating, the assets that are against it are likely going to go up. And this is the kind of central bank death spiral that we're in regards to devaluation of their own currencies. And it really only comes to a head one of two ways. Either hyperinflation, which you'll see interest rates that will destroy everyone and they level everyone out via that, or you'll get some kind of a debt jubilee at some point. And I don't think that's going to come. I don't know when that's going to come. We are expecting a crash at some point. Maybe it has a lot to do with debt like we've speculated, but we don't think that comes till the back end of 2024, potentially 2025. We actually had a great conversation in our Patreon where we looked at, and this is a little known fact, it's the election year next year, so they're not going to let anything I think happen until after that. And actually Spain, the UK, and a number of other countries have all moved their, bit of alpha here, guys, all moved their elections forward to 2024 in line with the United States one. So that makes me kind of wonder what's happening in 2025 when we're expecting a crash. Maybe there's something there, maybe there's not. But generally, they are continuing to inflate the markets. This is essentially a collective of central banks, reverse repo, balance sheets, things like this. And look at this with the markets. This is the great game, of liquidity. And this is really what you're watching. And this is still very important for us to watch. As liquidity rises, so does assets, basically. As debt and things like this rise, so do assets generally. And this isn't slowing down. And actually, we've been looking at the dollar, which we've been pretty much spot on about. And I'm going to play the Ray Dalio clip in just a second to love and leave you on. The dollar turning. We speculated here, and we've been very right. And we said risk assets are going to do well, having been stalled by the dollar strength on the rolling of the dollar. And we're getting that. Things are all playing out. We assess this as absolutely a bull. The bull's going to last. You could see a full Bitcoin 4-year cycle theory playing out. And we are yet to see the central bank balance sheet actually uptick. But just because the Fed isn't a buyer, there are still forms of liquidity, even if it's not for the bond market, for markets generally. And that's coming in the form of inflation of the debt supply, which is the system, the currency system itself. So quite a complex one, and we've gone down quite a few little rabbit holes. That's why the dollar's rolling over a little bit. But generally, Arthur's right here. There's this macro. If you think about markets, debt markets are right at the top with derivatives. And we're still a plankton, but we're going to benefit all the same from how that ecosystem works. So I think that's really all I've got for you. The last thing I want to do is just play a quick clip of Ray Dalio talking about the system, talking about where we are as an inflection point. It's very interesting that we're looking for a crash of some sorts. Ray Dalio says we're at that inflection point where things essentially go like, that curve really upticks in regards to debt. And what does that mean for the currency? And thus, what does that mean for assets like Bitcoin and alternative systems? So I'm going to go ahead and play that clip, and then I'm going to close the video out.
The longer term is that we are at a point in which we are borrowing money to pay debt service. And there is a process by which when you keep having debt growth faster than income growth, then that means that you have debt service encroaching on your spending. That's the same for the government as it is for us. And as that happens, and you want to keep spending at the same level, there is the need to get more and more into debt. And the way that works, it's like it accelerates. We are at the point of that acceleration, which creates the supply-demand problem. And it's made worse by the other issues that we're talking about. The internal political issue, the internal social conflict issue there is something that is affecting foreign demand for bonds. About 40% of our debt is sold to foreigners. And so there is a concern of the American politics, of the controlling of this debt crisis, and these types of things. So we come back to the same basic question. How strong are we going to be? When we talk about strong, what I mean is also economically strong. And economically strong means financially strong. That means it's just a basic thing. Financially strong means, do you earn more than you spend? And do you have a good income statement as a country? Do we have a good income statement? And do we have a good balance sheet? More assets than we have liabilities. The worse that gets, the more we are going to have that long-term problem. And it's just, you can see it in the numbers. It's just a matter of numbers. We are near that inflection point.
Some pretty grave words from Ray Dalio there. And it's going to be interesting to see how Bitcoin fares. Like I say, it's kind of popping up it's almost divine, you know, it's almost too good to be true. But we'll see. We'll keep you up to date on what is a very exciting space. Never a dull moment. It's been a huge week, guys. We've covered so much this week. There wasn't a great deal to cover, but we just sort of wanted to go over the overall system, where it's at, the strains with it, look at what's happening in Argentina, and cover a little bit of news. That's all I've got for you guys. If you enjoyed the content, likes, appreciate it. So as a comment, have a great weekend, ladies and gents, and I'll see you in the next.